Hi, everyone. Welcome and welcome back to many of you. This is day 2 of Destination Think Virtual Forum, our second presentation. Yesterday, William Bacher gave us a presentation on destination marketing strategy, and today we're here to discuss communications in uncertain times. So thanks for joining us, whether you're here live or listening to the recording later. I'm David Archer, Marketing Manager and Editor at destinationthink.com, and I'm pleased to be your host today. We will start soon. I just have a few notes for you. We'll have 90 minutes in total for today's presentation, and we received a lot of questions in advance, so thanks again for that. It's great food for thought. Our team has gone over all the questions and have built out the presentation based on those in part, so I think you'll find it quite valuable. And we'll likely have a little time at the end for a live Q&A period, so please submit questions using that Q&A box at the bottom right of your screen, and if we're able, we'll address some of those. Today, our two main speakers from Destination Think are Steve Hanzic, Creative Director, and Sara Raymond, Content Strategist and Marketing Manager Lead. But first, I'll pass it over to Rodney Payne, our CEO. Thank you.
Thanks, David, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again today. Now, we'd be very insensitive not to begin a presentation on COVID-19 without acknowledging that this crisis is first and foremost a humanitarian crisis. Our thoughts are very much with all of the people who've been touched by this illness, those working in the health industries managing the crisis, and the people who are working tirelessly to keep our societies functioning. We're also very conscious of the devastating economic impact that this crisis is having on people and businesses, not to mention our own travel industry. And today, though, as in each of our presentations as part of Virtual Forum this week, we're going to be talking specifically about destination marketing, how our industry is being impacted, and hopefully leave you with some helpful advice on what you can be doing about it. Now, our very first presentation last week led to a Facebook group that the Destination Think team is managing. If you haven't already joined, it's going to evolve into a very helpful place to connect with our team and your peers from around the world. If you have questions or ideas on how we can help you, or how you're working through various things that you'd like others to weigh into, please feel free to join. Now, this virtual forum, this is the second session of our virtual forum this week dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. Today, we're focusing on communication, what to be doing now as you adapt your communications focus and your resources, perhaps very stretched at the moment, and what you should be thinking about with one eye towards recovery. Yesterday, our Chief Strategist, William Bacher, presented on strategic planning, and that recording is now available online. And tomorrow, we'll be covering destination management with a look at how you can be supporting your industry. After this virtual forum, beyond the series of presentations this week that focus on what destinations can be doing to mitigate the crisis and what a destination marketing or management organization's role is in this crisis, we're exploring a variety of initiatives that we might step in to facilitate or lead. Things like resources and information that could be helpful with planning, advice on communications, templates and toolkits that might help you to evolve your communications in the way that both of our presenters will be talking about today, through the phases of mobility and then into recovery. We're talking to destinations all over the world at the moment, and after this series, I encourage you to connect with us on Join the Network if you'd like to talk to one of our team as well on some of your ideas on what we can do together as a network. Now, as I hand to our presenters today, I want to leave you with a thought, something that keeps going on in my mind as we explore what destinations should be doing even beyond our industry, is that this crisis is both a massive disruptor and also, a great reset and accelerator of many of the existing trends. So when it comes to communications, don't assume that your audience is going to be the same. Don't assume that your product will be the same. Your industry landscape may be very greatly changed. Your behavior will need to change as a result of that, and your processes, even your objectives, might need to be rethought. So make sure to question everything. Do it for the right reasons, and make sure it doesn't stall your action. But make sure that you, don't appear to be opportunistic. Think about adding value to people's lives. So with that thought, I'd like to hand to Steve and then Sara to talk about, our advice on what to be doing and what to be thinking about at this time in the mitigation phase.
Hello, hello everyone. Thank you, Rodney. I'd just love to start with giving everyone with a top line overview of what you're going to expect in the next hour or so. So I'm going to kick off, and we're just going to give you a little top line on basic principles of helping everyone get through this uncertain time at the moment. And Sarah's going to dive in very deep and just make sure we get the anatomy of comms and how we can navigate through it as well. And then finally, we're going to finish off on working differently. So you may have seen this if you've been to a few of our other sessions, but this is probably the structure that we've been working a lot of our talks to of late. And you'll see that at the moment we're in mitigate phase, and a lot of our conversation today will be referring to this chart here. So we'll be focusing a lot on mitigate and starting to move into the restart phase of focus. But just mindful that we did ask you to question everything and assume nothing. So I think it's only fair that we give you a checklist to try to get you through this. I'm mindful there's 1,000 of these at the moment, so we've endeavored to make it really simple for you, and it's the one that we actually use ourselves. So number one on our checklist is consider your audience. It's an interesting one, this one. It's like the first time I can ever remember that absolutely everyone can relate to absolutely everyone. We're all going through a shade of the same thing, which should make this easy, but it also makes it really complicated at the same time. It also makes it really dangerous if we don't consider our audience properly. And that's why this is number one. And we're going to go into a little bit deeper because it's a broad statement. There's so many things we need to consider when we're considering our audience. We need to ask ourselves these questions. And this is something that we'd really suggest everyone consider doing before they just release any piece of communications, or before they even start planning for some communications, is, are we considering the emotional state of our audience? It's a roller coaster ride up there at the moment. So we sort of figured out, we've just developed ourselves. And again, this is something that Sara is going to go into greater detail later on in the presentation. This is our emotional lens that we've sort of developed and have been refining over the last few weeks. It sort of has a spectrum towards the mitigate phase primarily at the moment. It sort of really allows us to try identify where we feel that our particular audience is feeling at that particular time, to make sure that our communications are right on target and be received appropriately. As you can see, there's a dotted line off to the right. As we get closer to restart, we see this evolving. There's so many factors that are going to have to change, and especially when, depending on how long we're in this uncertain time, there's the things that we're going to have to start thinking about is when will locals be actually emotionally ready to accept visitors? Is that something we need to start considering in this audience feeling? At the moment, we're keeping at this point because we feel like this has got enough of a spectrum and allows us to really funnel how we're thinking. So this is one way we consider our audience. This is an interesting one. Before this uncertain time, that first part of the question would be the end of it. Are we overstepping our place? And if I saw we were, generally it'd be like, yeah, maybe we should stay there. But it's a different time. Everything's changed a little bit. And maybe it's time for us to sort of rethink what is our place? And perhaps we can overstep what we traditionally felt we should be playing within because the world is different. But I guess the one thing that is really important in this question to yourself is, will it be appreciated? I think if we're ever going to play slightly out of our playing field is, will it be appreciated? And if it is, that's a really good reason to do it, because people need help at this moment. And if we can do something that they will appreciate, the audience will value you for it. Are we providing value to our audience? Now this, again, another big statement, but a really good one to sort of check off your list every time you're looking at it. Are we providing value? Are we saying something that they've heard 1,000 times? Do they already know? Because like if it's a person and someone's already told you 12 times and you told them again, they're not going to like it, right? So simple one, but something for us to consider is like, are we helping them? Is there something that is what we're doing actually adding a little bit of value to their lives? And I guess a lot of that comes from planning ahead and making sure we're out at the right time, targeting, if we are targeting at the time, at the right time, planning ahead so we're ahead of the curve instead of following it and saying something everyone else is. Are we encouraging unsafe behavior? A really obvious one, but surprisingly, really important to have on that list, because it's really easy to accidentally encourage unsafe behavior if you're not constantly looking at it. So we advise you constantly do that. Are we making assumptions about our audience current access to resources? Again, a really easy one to sort of fall into at the moment is for the right reasons, many of us, we're trying to do things, get people activated, try and encourage people to activate, help industry and do all that, but we have to do it really sensitively because our audience's circumstances have changed. Some people have lost their job and they would love to be helping people where they can, potentially can't. And that doesn't mean we can't be asking people to do things. It just means we need to be aware of it. And we need to make sure whatever we do doesn't exclude anyone, but allows people to still be aware of what circumstances have changed in their life. So number one on our checklist is consider your audience for those few reasons that we just talked about there. And then on that checklist, and we want to make it really easy for you, that's it. As far as we're concerned at this time, everything is so uncertain. If you can do this one point on your checklist and you only remember one point before you do anything when it comes to comms at the moment, for us, this is it. Consider your audience. And if we do, and you really have gone through those points and really considered them in every way, you're in far less risk of going wrong. And I don't want to go say you can't go wrong because anything can, but this will help you out a lot on the way. Right, so which brings me to another point. A lot of questions have been floating around at the moment. Does brand communications have a place in uncertain times? Which again is an interesting topic for us to discuss. We use this at Destination Think quote quite a lot, is a brand is a living entity and it is enriched or undermined cumulatively over time, the product of 1,000 small gestures. That last statement feels really relevant right now. The product of 1,000 small gestures. At Destination Think, we often refer to it as the sum of all stories told. It's what everyone sort of talks about your business. I found one other quote that I'd love to share with you, and it's an oldie but a goodie, but is using your expertise or brand capital to help during a crisis is not about commercial advantage or profit. It is about doing the right thing for society and showing a company's true values and citizenship. I think that's really what we should be thinking about, is when we think about brand comms in uncertain times, it's not so much about brand, it's about earning love. And it's what we need. It is, if any of our destinations are going to survive and what we're going to go and start into our recovery, is we need love and we need to build that reputation. And what we love to think about it at Destination Think is, especially with brand or brand comms, is it's not so much brand, it's reputation. And when you think about that and how we act in the coming times will really help shape that. You can't really say that. It's really hard to sort of say what your brand is all about, but when you actually act in a certain way, people feel it and they really get it. Because ultimately, your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. Destinations can behave in a range of ways that will earn brand love. There is so many things that we can do. And I'm going to top line a few ways or a few buckets, show you a few examples of how people have done it all over the world. And then again, Sara is going to go into far greater detail and dissect them for you guys. So the first one is being a responsible citizen. We've all seen a lot of these floating around in varying capacities. I think what I liked about and what I've sort of wanted to sort of brought out these different ones is the way you be a responsible citizen is also important. There's a really nice way to project your voice, your tone, what you feel of your place. You can see there's a bit of humor over there for the ACT, act like 90% of belly buttons, stay in. That's probably one of the most interesting stay-ins I've seen in a while. And then there's these really practical, responsible citizens ones. And I know there's a lot of these, like say for Destination New South Wales or New South Wales. To be honest, I love New South Wales virtually. I don't know exactly how this rolled out, but what I love looking at it and what I can imagine they would have done is it gives them the opportunity is we're going to be a responsible citizen. We're going to encourage you to stay in, but offer you the means to entertain yourself and explore virtually while you're in. And I see a lot of destinations doing that, is trying to find ways, partnering with industry perhaps, to actually showcase their destination while everyone's stuck inside and being a responsible citizen. Next is being a motivational citizen. And a few examples that I've seen here that I really liked is, I think we've all seen the Portugal one, You Can't Skip Hope. There's a beautiful message there, came out really early and they really set this, the tone there. A few of these aren't exactly destinations, but I really thought it was interesting. I found this piece from the Flower Council of Holland. And that what is there is up there is for the Let Hope Bloom, it's actually like a stop motion video of these flowers all building this really beautiful scene. And then they reveal this Let Hope Bloom. And I can really imagine a destination getting behind that and using that activity and sort of piggybacking off it and amplifying it for them, because we've all got, and we're going to talk about this a little bit further down the track, is our budgets have all changed, but there's nothing wrong with sharing. We don't have to do everything ourselves. We can work with everyone else and help amplify it. The other things that are there that I really loved is New York Tough. I really get the brand there. I can understand what their reputation is. And I think it's just a really nice way where it's motivational in 2 words. And it's a really great way to do it. And then right down in the middle there is we've got, I think Scotland's done a really nice job as well, is what they've done is motivational citizen is, yes, they've done the messaging, and there's dozens, if not more, of these motivational messages floating around at the moment from various places. But what I loved about Scotland is they actually weaved in through their narrative not only this motivational message of how you can feel and you emotionally go, oh yes, we can get through this, is great. Absence does make the heart grow fonder, this is lovely. They also sort of weaved in different ways you can sort of help during this time. Because the one thing that I'm noticing a lot is there's a lot of people who want to help. People want to do everything they can to support their community, which is a very lovely human trait that is poking its head out, which is so good. So they've trickled that in through the messaging. And again, we're going to show you a few different ways we can do that later on. Next thing is they can behave as being a humane citizen. Now, again, this comes in a big spectrum. Being humane, there's so much you can do. Now, on the left there, I know this is a government initiative, but Portugal grants temporary citizenship rights to migrants. That is huge. That sets a real tone of how people feel about a place. And it's something that, again, that a destination potentially can get behind and really sit there and like support that message or help share that message. Because since seeing that, I said, wow, Portugal is a really lovely place to care for everyone who comes in there. And I think as time goes on, and we go through different phases and different mindsets and different feelings, things like this is going to be important. Where do I feel safe to travel? And this is the sort of stuff that what we do here paves the future of how we can communicate later. So I love that example there. But then again, over to the right, where you go, I think it was Boston. And then they've done like just a simple initiatives, and I think it's to support the healthcare workers, where they put on their lights there and they do these little hearts throughout the city. And this is, I've seen this technique, very simple technique that people are doing all over the world, of this heart through the lights, but I absolutely love it. It's simple, everyone can get behind it, allows everyone to get involved, but it's a really lovely way, one, to sort of showcase the emotion, the solidarity, the actual culture of a people, but also shows how beautiful it is. Like, it seems like a beautiful place. That was just a car park that has got behind this initiative. Which brings me to the last one that we really think is a way that you can build brand love or a positive reputation, is being the citizen that citizens need at this exact moment. So for this one, I want to actually, there's a lot of examples for this. And again, we're going to go into a few of them, but for the one that I wanted to talk to you about, so I want to give you a little inside peek into a place called Campbell River. Not sure if everyone's heard of Campbell River. It's a lovely city in BC, Canada. And it's a really interesting story. And they've been very kind and allowed me to sort of show you what they're about to release in, I'd say, the coming week. So the story goes, and is the guys were actively just playing around on their social network, and they noticed that they were putting out some different little tasks like trivias and stuff, and it was getting a huge amount of engagement. I remember one of the girls there came over to me and chatted to us and goes, we sort of came to this enlightenment that at a time where everyone's locked in, they're stuck inside, bored, going through grief, what have you, your kids are running around, every engagement is a sign you've helped someone. And it's something really special, because Campbell River, if you don't know it, it's so community oriented. And they've got these so many beautiful cultural riches. They've got these things, they've got like beach fires are not just a random thing in Campbell River. It's everyone goes to them. They're so used to everyone uniting, coming together, going to these various beach fires. I believe it's even got to the point where most people have their own form of it in their own backyard. They got their own little things like s'mores, they got chalk festivals. It's really lovely. So what we thought to do is we saw that they were doing these little, they tried these little things to see what would work, and they got some engagement. So what we wanted to do was see if we can just give it a little bit of a nudge. So the strategy we put for them is, can we support locals' needs right now? Unite the community, give them a little of what they're missing back. Everyone is missing something right now. And obviously we can't give it back to them in its entirety, but can you give them a taste back? Can we support industry where possible while we're doing it? And can we do it in a way that shows a genuine side of ourselves? So onlookers get a real feel for a place. Again, that's deliberately third. It's like the first two is the most important, but if you do show and activate a community in a genuine and rich way, and if anyone sees it, they get a real feel for it. And again, does a lot of work for you as far as reputation goes. So what we did is we're starting to launch, and what we're calling is a series called the Lockdown Showdown. And the CTA, so basically it's a series of show and tell challenges to actually get the community engaged and have a bit of fun, and to sort of show everyone what we got, and just a big of a rallying cry. But through the experience, and as we're trying to put this together with the team, or just sort of, we found that we had this abundance of people who were coming up to Campbell River and really wanting to support. And like we had cinematographers, directors, we had editors, we had voiceover artists, and we go, oh, well, let's launch this with a film that can sort of rally the people. And the film was quite a lovely sort of, the film, the approach they wanted to do was, in an uncertain world, there's plenty they know for sure about Campbell River. It's the fact that they're real people. They're willing to get their hands dirty and still wash them. They know how to look after each other, but no matter how far or how long it's been, they're the kind of people that they're always going to pick up where they left off. And it's about rallying them all together so they can have this really nice community spirit and just rile everyone up to go, yes, this is us, this is what we can get through. But what they plan to do from there is go with a series of these challenges that I was talking about. So there's different versions of them. And again, we're happy to share these with you because we feel like it's a simple thing. And this is, we've map them up quite nicely here, and we've gone into a bit of sophistication. You can do quite simply. What we like about it is, again, you can support your locals and have people, let people have a bit of fun. So show your brew with a view. Show them what we've got Campbell River. So one, everyone's probably having a few beers. Show the local beers, support a local if you can. You can still get involved if you're not buying some more. That's fine. You can still show your brew with a view if you'd like. We're noticing that everyone's missing their fires. So the next initiative is a Zoom crew by the fire. So they're releasing a virtual background that everyone can put onto their background in Zoom and actually try and reenact it in a little way. There's so many initiatives that they can start playing again. Initiatives that are really unique to Campbell River and the community, and things we know they love and miss. Like things we know, like they're big on, the chalk art festival is a big thing. So we allow them one, kind of to entertain the kids. We're all looking for something to do, and borrowing a lot of things that are working really well over the world is show your street cred. Let's get everyone to do their street art on the front of the thing and see who can actually do the best one. We're going to see who can cook the best s'more, which is one of their unique dishes, and see if that actually works. And then again, relive wildlife moments. What we really love about it is it's got so many legs, and these are just a few that we've been talking about. And the one thing that they also mentioned, they're actively even going to the point where they're looking for the destination to be able to almost do a showdown with. So they can sort of have a bit of fun, engage the community against another community. So if anyone's interested, Campbell River would love to throw down a showdown your way. So you'll see a big range of what we talked about there, of the different ways we can approach that, and different tones, different sort of approaches, different levels of sophistication. I think what ultimately comes down to what decision and what is right for you is focus on the values that define your destination brand. As you can see, like Campbell River, they've got a unique energy about them, and in a wonderful way. They're a little rough around the edges. They like having a laugh. That was a really nice approach for them. But then again, that won't work for everyone. So there's something that I'm very passionate about is you can't tell people to believe your values. It's what we've wrestled with for years. Like we've tried to do it for communications, and you have various levels of success, but we need to prove that they are true. And this is the time that we can really prove what is important to our destination, or what truly represents our destination is true. And ultimately, it just comes down to think yourselves, be human. We are a part of the community. We're a major part of the community. And we need to respond like that and just be a loved part of the community. So just to finish this up, just so we can tie everything into everything that you're going to hear and everything you have heard, here's the 3 phases that we how we've been building a lot of our planning and our strategy. The way you respond in each of these phases will be slightly different, and how you respond will reflect your brand. And I think that's probably the way you should be thinking about it. If you're feeling pressure about doing some brand communications, every action you do is a brand communication. It is a most effective form of brand communication, because it's going to be something that people genuinely resonate with and will remember. It's also something that, as we talk about, and again, something that you'll see everywhere, is as people move through these scenarios, how we respond to that, how we plan ahead is going to really reflect our brand. And as we mentioned before, we've got these 5 restriction scenarios: lockdown, locally restricted, regionally restricted, nationally restricted, unrestricted. But we're not going to be always, in the best case scenario, and I hope we do, we move from left to right and we're golden. But we've got to prepare for that. But we also got to prepare for what happens emotionally to our audience when we go back a step. So we go up one and then we get back down. And it's something that we've seen in different places as they've loosened the restriction laws and then go, okay, that's not working, it's too early, we've got to bring it back. So being able to respond appropriately and considering our audience at the right time there, at the right time, will really reflect how we're looked upon. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Sara, and she's going to go into a deeper dive on the anatomy of comms.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, so as Steve mentioned, we do have a few restriction scenarios, and on the next screen, you'll see where we are most of the time right now, all the time probably, is in lockdown and locally restricted. Looking at those two, most of us are in some form of lockdown, with locally restricted being something that is hopefully in some sort of short-term future. And so as we're looking at this, it's important to note that the restriction scenarios are the conditions people find themselves in and that are imposed upon them. It's not necessarily an indication of how people are feeling within them. And so we really need to find ways to figure out how are people feeling, what is the range of feelings and emotion that people are having within the lockdown period, for example. So one way we've gone about illustrating this is through the emotional lens that Steve mentioned earlier. And within every scenario, keep in mind that there are a wide range of ways that people could be feeling. This one here works for lockdown. And this is a guide that we're developing and one that's constantly evolving depending on what happens in the world. And it's something that will be different for every single scenario. As Steve mentioned, as we go further over to the right, there could be a lot more things that grateful and optimistic feeling unlocks over there. And so this will be a more comprehensive form, because this is evolving constantly, will be available in that toolkit later. But in different scenarios, these emotions will be different. And individuals will move through these day by day. And one day somebody might be feeling really grateful and optimistic about, the home that they live in and the garden outside. And other days, certain things might happen to that same person that have directly impacted them, and they could go all the way over to this gray section. For example, someone who's at home with not much to do, they're missing their friends, but they're still catching up with them online. They might fall kind of into that yellow category right now. There might be parents who are at home with their kids and they're, a little worried about their kids' education or how long this will go on. And they'll probably start to tread into that light pink. But then suddenly, if people, switch from observing the crisis from afar and not feeling as impacted by it to all of a sudden being personally impacted by it, whether it's a sick family member or lost income, they'll start to move more into that gray period. The teal, the grateful and optimistic, this is a sentiment that we know people are feeling right now, but it's not always the easiest place for a DMO to be in. We know people are using this when they speak to each other about the things that they're happy for and how grateful they are for things that have happened to them or where they find themselves, but this is a little bit more of a tricky space right now for DMOs to play in. So content needs to take both of those restriction scenarios and emotional lenses into account when we're coming up with content and messages, and make sure that we know that these things can change daily for our audience. So on the next screen, I'm going to illustrate what this looks like in a different way with some examples from across the internet. And these are all pieces of content that have come down in lockdown and all speak to audiences' different needs. So for example, over here on the right, we have examples from Australia, the first one being from Queensland. And they're using their content right now as a way to educate people about the wildlife in the area, which is great to see. And still kind of putting brightening the mood a little bit, putting a little bit of humor into that social distancing, people being quite, wanting to make sure people are doing the right thing. And that's one way that that lockdown content could roll out. Another is Visit New South Wales, who's helping their audience to figure out kind of how to navigate this new being stuck at home scenario. Are there certain products that they can buy from small businesses nearby? How can they best support their community? And those are really great to see. Over here on the left, we have some examples that are treading more into that pink territory. New Zealand is taking an approach with a proverb that is really a message of solidarity about how people are all in this together and that they hope people are taking care of themselves and their family too. So a little bit of a different approach for the needs of their audience. And then you have an example from California where, it's probably a little bit going more toward that gray, where people are being more impacted by this. And just letting people know that they're there, they're respecting people's space, but they're here if they have questions. And if they need some distractions, they can continue to depend on California for some scenes of beauty from across the state as well. So same scenario, but different ways of approaching an audience depending on how they're feeling. On the next screen, we'll go into tone, because those are all ways that we can assume how people are feeling, but we need to take that and make sure that we're projecting the right messages during these scenarios as well. So tone is how we're going to respect the audience's feelings in space, especially in lockdown. So to start, this will be, helpful but not excited. Our content should probably be calm but optimistic. Human, definitely. All in this together, and that kind of that spirit of solidarity. Taking it day by day. This can be more of a higher idea, or it can also be something that we use as a reminder to not schedule content too far in advance and take content day by day to make sure that we're properly reflecting the mood within our target audience, and being supportive. Now, if we look at what this looks like in the locally restricted area, it's similar. But still has some differences there. We'll be grateful and looking toward the future, cautiously optimistic, but still not eager. We don't want to be too overexcited because we know that things can change quite quickly. We're still all in this together, and it's a good time for reflection and being supportive still with some of that messaging. Now, when we look at a couple examples of how this came about during people were going into lockdown, I really like these two examples that spoke to that tone. You have Intrepid Travel, who's really taking the opportunity to express their gratitude and thanking their community and kind of telling people that they are all in this together. And then you have Alberta, who is with this post helping people to not feel too upset that they can't travel now, trying to calm some of those worries of like, oh, I had this trip planned, what do I do now? I'm just reassuring them that certain parts of things they wanted to see on their vacation have been there for millions of years, and the good thing about you not being able to see them now is that you're going to be healthy and happy with your family, or healthy and keeping your community and loved ones close by. So these two here, as we go into a couple examples, I know that we are talking about lockdown and locally restricted. There aren't a huge amount of examples out there for locally restricted right now, because a lot of times that's still going to be in the future. However, the tone on posts like these can still be modified to speak to that locally restricted path once we get there. And so we talk about going into different contents and different audiences. What we're going to talk about today is content for locals, messages for advocates, and then also things that we can do to make sure that we're keeping visitors engaged as well. But before we go into all of that, I think it's really important to remember the basics, and that social media is all about community. So we know this is really rattling because we've been used to using social media and our other channels to push content for quite a bit of time now. But now's the time where we really need to switch gears and switch mindset, and not necessarily focus on pushing in promotion, but facilitating conversation and building that community. Social at its core is always about community, and I think that over the last little while, a lot of times ads have muddied that a little bit. But at the right now, where a lot of us have paid switched off, we need to make sure that we're going back to the basics, using our organic social for what it was originally intended to be. And it's rest assured that it's okay if you can't afford to spend money right now on ads. You can still see success and make an impact without it. And actually, some of our more successful campaigns have had very little ad spend, and they've just really focused on creating content and presenting things that would connect to an audience versus presenting them only what we wanted. So first off, we're going to go into locals. I want to just start about some messaging for them, because it's okay if you're finding right now that a lot of your messages are for locals, and that your content mix is weighted a little bit differently than you're used to. Locals are the ones that you can help the most right now. They'll be your first tourists when we move to locally restricted. And sometimes you might not have engaged with them that much in the past, and it's really important right now to engage with them and get them used to what you need, or what you would like to use, what you'd like to benefit from them in the future. So when we look at initiatives and content for locals, it's really important to be transparent and direct about news. This is something that you should do across all audiences. The reason being, if you try to sugarcoat things too much, or maybe hide what's actually going on, you're worried what people will think if you approach that head on. Sometimes the media will do that for you, and it might be misconstrued a little bit. So if you're more transparent and direct up front about what's happening in your destination, the less damage control you might need to do in the future. Encourage locals to support businesses through options like takeout and delivery. And then lean on your locals to share content that can drive local pride, or provide perspectives to share with potential visitors. Your locals are the soul of your community. They can really illustrate what it means to live there and what your destination is all about. activate locals in a way that they can support you in the future, and then champion those doing good. And so in comparison, when we look at locally restricted on the next screen, still really important to be transparent about news and also be informative about how to keep communities safe while traveling. You want to make sure to encourage locals to support the community. Day trips to start with, maybe weekend trips, and this will also really depend on the size of your destination and the state of the pandemic as well. Some of you might be a city or a state or a country, and it really just depends on what locally restricted comes to mean in your area. Use this as an opportunity to rally local pride and make sure to support residents supporting residents. And still use locals as a way to explore a place on an outsider's behalf. As people start to move around a little bit more, they might be visitors only glimpse into what's actually happening in your destination at that point in time. And that work that you've done now to really build up your locals as ways to, as people who can support you, that's going to help you in the locally restricted period. And again, make sure to champion those doing good. Now, some examples of content for locals that we see that really span the different colors of those emotional lenses. You can see Mammoth Lakes, a beautiful area in California, but not necessarily focusing on the scenery right now, but using their Facebook page as a way to express community support for their hospital and bringing in local families to share messages in support of healthcare workers. And that's probably something that their community really appreciates right now. You have LA, who is using their locals to showcase a glimpse of LA from a different perspective out their windows. You know, everyone in LA is at home, a lot of people around the world are at home. And so this is one way that LA can still continue to showcase the wide variety of landscapes and cityscapes across the whole region by really benefiting or by really using their locals. And it's a good way to get their residents involved in what they're doing as well. Over in Sydney, long weekend coming up, and we know around the world that certain times nice weather and a long weekend can mean that people might start to be a little bit lax about social distancing. And so Sydney's taking that civic messenger duty here, encouraging their locals to stay home, but still doing it in a way that people who aren't in destination can find this valuable as well. One example I really liked, probably one of the favorite videos I've seen so far, comes from the Downtown Seattle Association. And what I really admired here is the courage and how transparent they were in tackling the situation at hand. This is a video that didn't really sugarcoat the scenario in Seattle. It has a lot of empty street scenes. It does look like quite an empty city, but it definitely had a very inspiring message at the end. So I'll definitely share the link in the group after this if you guys want to watch it in its entirety. And what I thought was interesting about this was two things. It was made for locals, but it's still really valuable to advocates or visitors or anybody who feels they have a connection to the city, whether or not they've been. And what it also goes to show is how important it can be right now to team up with other organizations in your destination and share this content creation and all these ideas and share that creativity around. So if you have a message that you want to go out, it's probably going to be valuable to your entire community. So don't reinvent the wheel, just focus on supporting each other. It could be, you know, as easy as a Facebook share or maybe even a retweet there. On the next screen, a couple of final ideas for this section. As you're writing your content and developing things with locals in mind and that audience in mind, just ask yourself how your messages can help locals and businesses now. There's one example of this is California's Takeout Tuesday, which uses Tuesday as the day of the week to try to get the entire state to order takeout and delivery safely, if possible for them, depending on their resources. And this is something that other DMOs throughout the state as well can buy into, and restaurants can as well. And everybody can really work together to support all of these local businesses across the state on Tuesdays. But I think that lending a helping hand can go beyond food. You know, delivery and takeout are the easy ones at the moment, but also think about your artisans and makers, and you know, even as specific as your chocolatiers or your fashion designers, and you know, and winemakers. You know, if your city had a farmers market and the farmers don't have anywhere to sell their things now, it could be a really great time to lend them a helping hand through your content. The next section I want to go into is advocates. And the reason is that advocates, we think, are a really important audience to consider at a time like this because they already love you and they really want you to succeed. They know what you're about. It's a little bit of an easier sell. They know how to get to you. They probably already have a favorite restaurant. They probably have a hotel that they like the most, and they have maybe a tour, a fishing tour or something like that they go on every time they visit. And even if they can't personally travel right away, or maybe even if they feel that they have a lot of other places to explore before returning back, they're already going to be able to tell their friends to visit you anyhow. So they're a really important community for an audience to not forget about at this time. You're already an important part of their life story. So a couple ways that we can speak to them at this point in time is, again, being transparent and direct with news and travel updates. Encourage these past visitors to share memories of travel. That's going to be something that might help them go down memory road and spark some joy in their day. But it can also be something that's really interesting content that you get to learn about their experience and destination and can share with a wider audience. Focus on some deep dives into storytelling as a distraction from the news. You might not need to tell them that you have an aquarium, but there could be a story from the aquarium that is really interesting that they might not have known about and can give them a richer perspective on your destination. And encourage the support of small business from afar. Now, if we go into the next stage of this, which would be locally restricted, there's not a huge amount of change here. But what we do know is that it can continue to be important to dive deeper into their stories and recommendations of past travels, because that will be really important in encouraging others and activating word of mouth for others to come and join in the destination when it's safe to. And as more local businesses open, encourage supporting those from afar. Now, a couple examples here. It's important to note that advocates probably miss you like you miss them, and they're hearing about you in the news, and they might be worried about you as well. So don't forget that they also have this really strong connection to you, and the more you can do to kind of give them updates from your destination, the happier they might be and the less worried they might be about you if they are worried. So a couple examples here is Dapper Dan's from Disneyland. This is a post shared a couple weeks ago. And full disclosure, as I was putting this together, I had no idea who the Dapper Dans were before I looked into it. And they're a barbershop quartet that performs at Disneyland. But just because I had no idea who they were, and it wasn't necessarily something that's going to make me really excited about Disneyland right now, it doesn't mean that Disneyland's advocates didn't love this content. And you can tell from the results on this, 10,000 people liked it. Over 1,000 people were moved enough to comment on it. And over 5,000 people shared this with their community as well. This was definitely a piece of content that people who love the Disney experience and who are missing that experience right now really enjoyed and showed their love for. Over in Lord Howe Island, I liked this approach as well. It's kind of a Dear Diary approach a little bit. Here's what's going on here. And kind of a don't worry, we're doing okay. And it gives people an interesting insight into how people across the world are living completely different from them. I really love the touch here of talking about how there's just a family on the island who sorts out the mail that comes in by ship. And it was a really interesting look into the life that they have over there. It also goes to show that long form content, as long as it's interesting and valuable, that's totally fine. We don't need to worry about making everything super short. We can kind of bend the rules at a time like this. A couple more examples. This approach from Hawaii was a nice touch as well. Hawaii has tons and tons of repeat visitors. And the sentiment of, calling people across the world their ohana or their family near and far was a really nice touch that, could really speak to some of those advocates who might have had to cancel their trip or, are wondering when the next time will be that they can visit. Over in California, showing people who love the state and who might have had to cancel a trip or, who maybe aren't sure when they should book one again, how to bring some California products to their front door and really bring some of that California spirit to their homes. A couple of these other examples really show the more human side of tourism businesses. The Bronx Zoo using their facilities as an ambulance staging ground in New York, and then American Airlines as well, showing the more human stories about the people who are traveling across the country to take care of people in hospitals in different regions. So getting over to visitors, I want to say that all of the content that we've gone over, that it's for locals or advocates, can still be relevant to visitors, but there are some types of content that you can create that will still be specific to them. So on the next screen, you'll see that the audience is always going, the visitor should always be at the core of everything you do here. And this is really where Steve's checklist is probably the most important. Keep in mind as you're going through these that this is where you're really going to have to double check those emotional lenses. When you're speaking to locals, you're kind of going to naturally have a sense of where people are on that color spectrum. When you're talking to your target market, they might be, nearby, but they might also be really far away. So it's important to really keep that in mind. Have a look at their newspapers and make sure that you're understanding their realities before you put something out that might be totally okay in your region, but is not going to be okay for them. And if you are speaking to somebody in an area, if your target market is somewhere that is having a really hard time right now, it doesn't mean that you can't post anything, but just remember the tools that you have. Maybe use some geo-targeting in order to shield them from that, where you can still talk to your locals or talk to people who might be less affected, but can still respect the space of those who might be having a tougher time at the moment. So some things to keep in mind as well is that people will be talking amongst themselves about travel no matter what. They might not be only talking about your destination if you've put a post out. And there's plenty of examples from friends talking to friends or influencers talking to their communities right now of people talking about travel. So rest assured that, while it is important that, you try to maintain a little bit of presence in their feed, that if you're on their list, they're still going to be dreaming about you and they're still going to be asking their friends about where they want to go to, because people are missing travel right now. It's not just tourism missing visitors. So when we talk about visitors, or more specifically, probably first-time visitors during lockdown, it's important to, again, be transparent and direct with news for all the same reasons as before. And certain things that you can do are a little bit more on the creative side. So, you can have some creativity brought into providing breaks from the news for people with live looks from your destination. Virtual visits and educating travelers right now are great. Sharing positive stories from your destination, and then travel later messages. I know we've been seeing a lot of travel later messages, but as you do these, just be cautious that they're not being too repetitive or insensitive, because if somebody is more on that gray side of the spectrum, telling them it's okay but they can travel later could maybe not come off as the most appropriate at the moment. When we go into locally restricted, it's probably best to still don't actively encourage traveling to the area unless it is possible for people to do, obviously. But a gentle hint toward travel planning and forward thinking is totally fine in that space. Those glimpses and live looks with more of a future focused view, that's great. That's where you can put in a little bit more of that inspirational message of, soon we'll see you again. Here's what's waiting for you. Deeper dives into education about your place are going to be really useful during this period, and also educating on how to be a better traveler in a more grateful world. As things start up again and it's kind of a clean slate, travelers might also be thinking about how they're going to approach different travel scenarios for them. Are they going to travel different? What are the places that they want to support? And so if you have opinions on the types of behaviors that you would like them to model, probably wouldn't hurt to be thinking about those and how that might come across in some of your messages. So some examples from here. A lot of these are more speaking in the yellow space, a little bit of the pink space, but I know we're seeing a lot of ideas of how DMOs can really help to bring a destination into someone's home when they can't physically visit. Norway is doing a really good job with this. A lot of the videos talk about things from interior design all the way through to movies and films, and other ways that people can virtually visit Norway or get a little bit of their Norway fix for the time being. I also really liked what Visit San Diego's doing of taking some iconic experiences within the destination and diving a little bit deeper in them, using them as an opportunity to have almost little micro documentaries of talking about, this is the 7 gorgeous gardens in Balboa Park, and gives people a chance to learn about the history of them from afar. You can see that results here really great. So it's definitely content that's providing value to their audience. Now, these examples here kind of show that it's okay to figure out, how to nerd out with your audience a little bit on different niches and different interests. There's a tulip festival in Skagit Valley here in Washington that's obviously not going forward, but the festival organizers and the certain businesses associated with this are still giving a lot of virtual tours of these tulip areas, and then also doing photo series that educate people on things that would be quite interesting to them if they were really into gardening. And people are at home, they're gardening more. That can be content that is of value to a wider audience than it might have been before. The Monterey Bay Aquarium has their jellyfish cam, and that's a fun one. But as they've seen, it's been successful enough that people really want to figure out how to support the aquarium during this time. And it's gone, you know, and they're providing people not only with the videos, but ways that they are able to financially support the mission of the organization. And this has been a really interesting way to raise awareness about their missions as well. So as you're creating this content, just think of people in their homes and what would be valuable to them at the moment. Is it school lessons or art lessons? Maybe it's tips on photography, maybe it's recipes. A couple of these examples here, you know, Mount Rainier is using park rangers to use yoga to entertain kids, but then every yoga pose also has information about the park that comes with it. So this is Sleepy Fox pose that we see here, but there's also an erupting volcano one that gives information about Mount Rainier's volcanic history. And all of these are geared toward kids and can really help to lighten the mood for the people who are in the space to kind of accept that content right now. There's also, I know we've probably seen tons of recipes going around, but there are plenty of foods that are probably synonymous with your destination. How can you use that and those iconic foods that they can't be tasting in destination, but they can still be tasting at home, and using as an opportunity to educate others about those foods too. I think a helpful hint with all of the recipes that are going out. If anybody has a grocery list that can accompany those would also provide more value by making those shopping trips a little bit easier and a little bit less of a puzzle too, knowing that that can be something that's a little bit harder for people right now. And yeah, if we think about our audience too, when they are stuck at home, especially parents with children, you know, maybe worried a little bit about how are they going to manage each day with routines and, you know, making sure that their kids are happy and healthy. At Cincinnati Zoo has every day at the same time a home safari Facebook Live that still really helps to educate kids, but also can be one of those important building blocks for the day that might help people to establish some of those routines that they might be missing right now. So valuable there too. A lot of great stuff happening with some of the animal experiences. So as you're developing this content, while we are, you know, in this mitigation phase and just trying to get through this and making sure that we're doing it in the most appropriate way possible, as we're looking into content, there's probably a few questions that we can use now that will help us be in better shape when we're heading into that restart. So the first of these questions: which sort of traveler will you want to attract back? And are you writing content that inspires the ideal visitor or the random visitor? So, you know, as you're thinking about resetting a little bit how you're doing social media, you know, already your mix might be different. You might be talking to locals and advocates more than visitors right now. When you are writing content, are you talking to the people that you really want to engage with, or are you talking to people in the way that you used to because of old habits? So keep that in mind, because it's not like you need the answer now, but it can definitely help you going into restart and be in a better situation there. The next question: what would you like the world to know about your home if they had never heard of it before? And this is an interesting one because you know, it really gives you the opportunity to think about those things that you always wanted to get across on social media or across other content forums. Is this an opportunity for that to happen because you might be a little bit low on things to say and not sure what messages to put out right now? You know, you're not really being as, your time and your priorities might not be as conflicted because of the lack of paid. And so there might be space to really dig into what you really want to say about your destination that you just might not have had the chance to before. And finally, use this as an opportunity to get beneath the surface of your destination and showcase who you really are and why you stand out for other places. So as you're creating content, maybe this is the people, maybe this is a landscape, maybe this is, you know, the history that you haven't really been able to fully tell, and those stories that you really want to bring people in on and facilitate conversation around. But as you're creating content, just keep these 3 things in mind, because they could give you a little bit of advice in the future of how to go and to restart as well. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Sarah.
No worries.
Okay. So we've given you a lot of information about how we can approach our comms and the different messages and messaging and the value and how it can build into our overall reputation and brand. So what we want to do is actually go a little bit of a step aside and start thinking about how we actually work, like how we can make it, because we're in a really different kind of world. Everything has changed in the last 3 weeks or so. So we've got to work differently. Budgets are slashed or non-existent. We're fully aware. Like, it's been really rough for a lot of people out there, but we need to really start rethinking things and start thinking, how can we make the most of what we have and still get a lot of benefit out of it? So budgets are slashed. Maybe we need to start rethinking our mix. And so I imagine everyone on this will be aware of the paid, owned, and earned mix. So traditionally, I would say, again, this is just a guesstimate, is we've been really heavily indexed on paid, owned, and earned. Obviously, as money has been dissipated somewhat, that's going to need to shift quite a lot in the near future. And everyone is already reacting this way. And I think what's really important is it's not a bad thing. We can do a lot of work with it. We're seeing a lot of results in focusing on owned and earned. And if you do have the means, a little bit of paid still comes in handy. So I think it is still keeping the mix, but using your means where you have it and just seeing where you can get the most bang for your buck and do the most value for your destination. But there's a lot more to working different as well. As we mentioned before, people want to help. I think now is the time you really should let them. I think it's not about taking advantage of them, but if people want to help you, allow them to. If you have people going, hey, I love your place, your destination, you've helped me out so much over the years, let me do something. Try activate them. I know a lot of people's resources are stretched and it's really difficult, but the more we can try to do this, the more cost effective and more resourceful we can be. But a lot of that will kind of mean maybe you need to ask your agency to work with you differently. And that's different for every destination, or every situation will be slightly different. In many ways, your agency might need to step up for you if you need them to, where they can sit there and help you where they haven't done in the past. Or alternatively, it could be, how can your agency work with these people who want to help you? So you sit there and go, all of a sudden we're getting into more of a mentality. It's like, okay, can you do this, but work with this director and don't give them a hard time because it's pro bono. And it becomes this more of an organic sort of environment where you do your part for the resources we have. I think now is moving on from that is test and learn, but always remember the checklist. And I really mean that. I don't feel like, in the pace that everything is changing, and planning obviously can only do so much, I think we have to be willing to let things be a little rougher than they used to be. Like, don't wait for weeks and weeks and weeks to polish an absolutely crafted piece of film when you can get something out that's not like that. It's obviously got to still be good, but you can get it out there and sit there and see how it's reacting. Like we were saying with Canberra Rivers, the girls tried a few things and we got some reactions. We go, wow, this is what the community wants. And then you can start sort of evolving and adapting. Obviously, that is all these situations. I don't want to make any assumptions on anyone's means and resources within DMOs, but here's just a few thoughts. And I guess last but not least on that is, don't feel obligated. Obviously, being in marketing, talking is always a good thing. If you're right, you're considering your audience and your timing is really right, but don't feel like, oh, but you can't. If you can't do it, say less. I think it's always better just to make sure you're getting something out that's appropriate and a little bit than saying too much of stuff that's just going to get lost. Which brings me down to the last thing is, we need to work different, but there's a few fundamentals that I just want to hit just before we finish up and go into questions. Is, don't abandon some of the fundamentals. Ideas will always stand out from the crowd no matter the budget. I think it's really easy in these uncertain or somewhat desperate times where we'll resort to little bad habits where we'll go, we'll throw this out, but we won't really think about how will this stand out, or how would this be a little bit different? How would this be, what is the idea that will make this compelling to the audience so they can value it and absorb it, because it will be good content if you thought about it. I think it's always important to figure out the way how many small actions can amplify a singular high-level thought. If you do have the times and the means, you think about how can this tactic, how can we loop them all together and tell a bigger story? And then last but not least, it's been really important throughout the years is don't follow the herd too much. It is, obviously we need to research, we need to be mindful of everything that's going out there, but if everyone is saying the exact same thing, is there any point in you saying the same thing, or are you just adding to the noise and sort of wasting resources where you can allocate it to much better places? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Sarah. That was really terrific to hear your insights. I know you're both very busy at the moment helping your teams and clients with these challenges, so we all really appreciate you taking the time out from your work to share your advice. As I mentioned at the start of this presentation, our sessions to date have covered what destinations should be thinking about during the mitigation phase of the crisis, and we're exploring ways to help the industry collaborate and how we can bring the global community of destination marketers together, what we can provide at Destination Think that might make your lives easier, other sessions like this, or tools or resources. We know that budgets are really, tight at the moment. We can't imagine, how difficult it is with team members and resources stretched more than ever, and priorities pulling us in many different directions. So, many of the communications planning templates and resources that we use internally at Destination Think may be really helpful for people. We'd love to hear from you and connect with you to hear, where your challenges are, to guide us. And we're starting an initiative to be able to explore that. If you have ideas or would like to talk to us about some of ours, you can let us know here at destinationthink.com/join the network. Now I'll hand over to Dave to see if there's some audience questions.
Thanks very much, Rodney. So like I mentioned before, through the whole presentation, our team has worked really hard to cover as many of your questions as possible during the presentation that you submitted in advance, and I'd like to thank everyone for doing that, and also thank you for sending in your questions during this session, and some kind words as well. We really appreciate that. So there were a few strategic questions that I'd like to start by directing to Rodney. Rodney, are you ready to sit in the hot seat for a few questions?
I can definitely do my best.
Okay, that sounds great. Question number one is, which audiences will be most likely to return to travel first? And what will travel sentiment be in the immediate post-COVID period?
Okay, so for those of you who didn't manage to listen to our presentation yesterday on strategic planning, it's been recorded and it would be really helpful to guide on that question. The easy answer is be guided by the health crisis and your government's response to manage that crisis. The audiences that will return to travel first will be in this order, and it will probably seem overly simple when I say it. Locals, once they're allowed out of their houses, if you're in lockdown. Regional markets, when they're allowed to travel around locally. Domestic markets, once they're allowed to visit and travel beyond their state or regional or provincial borders. And then next to come online will obviously be international, once the logistics of airports and airlines start to come back online. But people also will need to feel safe to visit in all those markets, and they also need to have the disposable income to be able to travel and prioritize it over other things. So research into that will be important. It's inevitable that many destinations may actually need to shift target markets once you come out of the mitigation phase. And you'll also need to understand how your industry landscape has changed, if all the same experiences and travel opportunities remained in place. So yeah, understanding traveler sentiment market by market will be really important.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how people respond once travel starts opening up. Question number 2, what are pros and cons of launching a campaign that inspires intrastate travel without certainty on travel restrictions ending?
That's probably similar. I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record here, but be guided by the level of mobility that your government allows at any time, and also know that that could change to be more restrictive at any time. You could go from being allowed some level of travel to having to go back as public health officials attempt to manage the public health crisis. So this is a little bit of a high risk question. I personally believe the DMO has a great responsibility here, and how you act could affect your reputation for quite some time. And the situation itself is very, very uncertain. We don't know a lot about this particular virus, and things can change very quickly, which is why it's such a hard scenario to manage. So monitor data. And again, we talked about this yesterday in the strategic planning presentation. So I'd encourage you, if you have the time, to dig up the recording on that, and be prepared for each phase and know the triggers for timing. So you want to be ready with your communications or campaigns to come out of the gate once travel does open up.
For sure. And for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, you can find the recording from yesterday on the destinationthink.com blog or through our Facebook group. Next question. So actually, we got 2 questions along kind of the same vein. When do we look forward and not back? Or to put it another way, how do you evaluate the transition from critical or crisis communications to recovery?
There's a slide that we've been using in all of our presentations that sort of shows a few different curves for recovery through the mitigation, restart, and reimagine phases. And I think when you shift from mitigation into the next phase, which is restart, that's probably the answer here in terms of when to start communicating differently in a forward-looking way, and to know when that transition's happened. And that happens once the health crisis is clearly ending, both in your destination and in the places where the target audiences are that you want to talk to. To be sensitive, and playing back to a lot of what Steve and Sara advised, to really think about your audiences and what they need at the time. You should obviously plan for multiple scenarios. These answers will be different depending on some of the nuances around different destinations, but develop scenarios for your destination, monitor data, refine them as the situation changes, and be ready for the phase change and to know when things are safe to travel and opening up again.
Okay, thank you. Next question, and Sara might be able to jump in to add to your answers as well along the way. But Rodney, besides regular social media posts, what are some creative ways to promote or market a destination that don't cost anything?
So this is something I've been thinking about a lot, and we've been talking about internally at Destination Think. We've been strong proponents of advocacy as a form of promotion for a number of years. Social media brought about this massive opportunity to manage people who love your brand and love your destination, and have them be your mouthpieces through word of mouth. The people who love you will help you. And some of our, very best campaigns, and Sara, maybe you want to speak to this a little bit, but some of our very best campaigns, have used very small paid media budgets. There's an assumption that you have to pay for attention, and it's simply not true. And I think now more than ever, you've got a huge opportunity to talk to the people who are loyal to your brand, repeat visitors to your destination, work with your local residents, work with your industry. Every one of those segments has their own audience, and you can reach them together. So really think about own channels as a massive opportunity.
And I think I'd add to that as well, you know, a lot of times when we say the word influencer or community, a lot of times people's mind goes straight to online community or online influencers, but keeping in mind that there are plenty of offline influencers in an area, and there are a lot of offline communities that gather around interests. And I think that that's where a lot of the good opportunities off of social media can start to grow from as well.
Thank you. Next question. What role do visitor information centers, or VICs, have to play as content providers while travel is so restricted?
I think, Sarah, you've probably got a ton of ideas as well, but I think from my perspective, you know, there's a number of different roles that visitor centers and, you know, even communications teams at destination marketing organizations can step into, really depending on what it is your community needs at any given time. You know, one thing that maybe a lot of destinations haven't considered is the need to support travelers who may be stranded. I hear more and more anecdotal stories about people who aren't able to get home to their home country. So it's one thing to think about whether you can help those people in some way. But really, you know, support other aspects of your community's, you know, greatest needs. Perhaps official communications people are stretched and you can step in and support them, or maybe there's a role you can fill to build morale and connect with your local residents through, you know, what is inevitably a really difficult time.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, online listening could be a replacement for kind of the face-to-face contact that people might have, you know, have come into an information center for. But using this as an opportunity to focus on community management, listening for those conversations that people are already having, and you know, maybe people out there, if you are finding conversations where they're planning travel, you know, jumping in to support them from afar as kind of an online concierge. I think that if it is an area as well where there's maybe a lot of local products for sale or certain things, in that you guys can help with, you know, kind of advocating for people to support local businesses from your area, as kind of gathering up a lot of that information that the DMO can use. There's probably quite a few other ideas as well, but you know, if there are any ideas as well that you're seeing or people that you're encountering in the community from afar, of course, that you know have great stories to tell, you know, helping to gather those stories and curate content that your whole community, whether it's the DMO or a larger you know, a larger tourism body can use to help get their messages across, can be a valuable way to help out too.
So it's really interesting what you're both saying there as well. Something just popped in my head as you're talking, Rodney and Sarah, is about those visitors that are stranded, and almost sort of crosses over with that previous question that just came up, is like, how are ways that beyond social that can we can actually get noticed or actually get some mention creatively, is, I think, again, not for the wrong reasons if we do it for the right reasons, but acts of kindness are the best way to sort of promote your place. And it doesn't matter if someone picks it up, great. If not, but if there are opportunities to help people and you genuinely help them, people do notice those things, and that will do a lot of work for you.
Absolutely. I would move on to the next question. So Sarah's portion of the presentation gives some good examples of this, but how are others weaving in messaging for staying at home and keeping up with social distancing while also having messaging about dreaming about travel?
Sarah, would you like to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's probably a variety of ways to do it, and a lot of times with the messaging, it doesn't necessarily need to be that it's written down and kind of put in someone's face of, here, dream travel later, but stay home and be safe for now. I think a lot of times, anytime we're using a photo or a video or something that's a beautiful scene from our destination, or something that really speaks to the character and the energy of a place, it's also still feeding into that dreaming message, whether or not it's written down and, you know, in bold writing there. And so I think that, you know, there obviously is a lot of opportunity and need right now to be telling people to stay home, especially like the long weekend example, or a weekend when the weather's nice and everybody thinks that they can flock to the beach. But a lot of destinations have been doing this in a nice way, where we know that you love the outdoors, we know that you love the beautiful scenes that you find here, but please, for us, help keep our communities safe right now for staying home. And I can find a couple more examples as they come about. And I know I could think of a few off the top of my head from the past few weeks that I can share in that group as well too. To kind of show how people are balancing those messages, whether it's the very overt keep dreaming or whether that's a little bit more subtle.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Just quickly add to that. It's a really delicate balance between, reinforcing official instructions around stay at home and distancing, and not being insensitive to other places that are going through challenges. So just really understand those different audience situations and be really careful not to get it wrong, because again, it could backfire.
Definitely. So this will be the last question for today. And it has to do with those audiences as well, as we start thinking about what they need and how they're feeling. Last question is, do you think communication has to be the same for different age targets? So that has to do with demographics, or how do you treat that during this situation?
Sarah, I'd be interested to know your thoughts. I haven't really been thinking necessarily about age targets or segmenting by age necessarily. I've personally been thinking more about geographic markets first, in a cascading order of the ones that are allowed to travel as things reopen, and then thinking about economic factors like disposable income, people who aren't fearful of travel. But I haven't necessarily thought about age. So again, I'd be thinking personally about going back to fundamentals when the time's right to restart, and re-examining all of your focus markets to make sure your product still aligns to what they need. But Sarah, I don't know if you've got any thoughts specific to age.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think my first thought when I heard this question is thinking about, no, things don't need to be the same for every single age group, but being sensitive that just because somebody might be more of a Gen Z or something doesn't mean that they're not going to know people who might be more likely to go into the hospital or are kind of toward that older age spectrum. Just being aware that some of the topics, even though they might not be personally affected by, if they get sick, they might have to go into the hospital, but they still will know people and still be impacted by that. So I think in that, looking at it from that view, a lot of the messaging should be the same for all different ages. However, if we're not taking it that far to the extremes, there are plenty of different channels that different people are on right now on social media, depending on age groups. We do kind of anticipate that our ideas right now of, Instagram is for this age group and Facebook is for this age group and TikTok is for this age group will probably change after this, because a lot of people will be spending time on new tools that they might not have beforehand. But some of those things that we already understand about age groups on different channels could still be really important here if you are trying to reach a different age target audience. And just keep in mind that a lot of the messages might be the same, but the way you present the content would be different and would be the better fit for where you're speaking to that audience and the channel that they're on.
I couldn't agree more, Sarah. It definitely, when you are targeting and you have the means to sort of target different age demographics, it's what comes out of it that, like, the messaging may be very similar. It is the truth and the idea is definitely always targeted to what will really resonate with that audience and what's a cultural truth that's specific to them. So when that message, even without calling them out specifically, feels really relevant to them and it's delivered in a way that they will resonate with, that is something that is really present in their life. I think that's a really smart way to start adjusting the way you package up your messaging to make sure it's really relevant and gets absorbed in a positive way by a different demographic.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Steve and Sarah and Rodney. and thanks to all of you for joining us today at Destination Think. All those of you who've registered for this event will receive the recording of this presentation by email today. We're also going to make it available through our blog. We're doing daily recap blogs where we'll post the presentation and the slide deck. Some of you have asked about that too. So we encourage you to share that widely when it comes out. And in the meantime, like Sara mentioned, she may share some more examples through our Facebook group. So that's an area that's just started up in the past week or so. And we've already got, I think, over 700 people in there talking about all of these challenges that we're facing together. So please go in there and say hello. There's the link on your screen now, or just visit our Destination Think Facebook page and you'll find how to get into that group. So once again, thanks everyone for being here, and we'll see you next time for session 3. Take care.